China, Beijing, Shanghai, can you hear me? It's wired, I guess. First and foremost, Vinod and the Khosla Ventures team, it's the second CEO Summit, but it's just amazing, the caliber, how the bar is continuously being raised. You're setting the example for what all the CEOs here need to do. So a very big hand from our behalf to you. So I'm going to be talking about risks, and if you think about the business that you're in, it's really, as CEOs, we are chief risk mitigation officers. If you think about your business in the early days, it's all about risk, and you can treat each one of those as risks, and like any good operating CEO, you run to the gunfire. You don't go away from it. You face the risk, you mitigate the risk, you plan around the risk. What are those risks? Well, on an everyday basis, we all manage risk. That comes intuitively. Okay? You wouldn't be driving across the bridge even if the traffic allowed you to at 100 miles an hour, maybe because you're afraid of a ticket, maybe maybe because you're afraid of safety, maybe a combination of those. And for each one of you, a risk profile goes. But in managing a company, if you can put some structure, if you can put some organization, if you can teach your people how to think about it in a systematic, methodical manner, it's extremely helpful. What can you do? If you simply look at your business, it's market timing and size. There are some products that you all work in that if you couldn't get the product into the market within a certain time frame, you lost a very big opportunity. Or you may not have captured the size, not being the first entrant into the market. If that's your biggest risk, depending on where you are, you need a completely different set of strategies. Take the value proposition. Depending on what time you are, when you're operating in something, the value proposition can change from being a painkiller to a vitamin. Everybody needs a painkiller. You have a toothache, you're not going to put that away. You need that right away. Timing changes, things change in the marketplace, it becomes a vitamin. You don't need that as much. So always understanding, are you selling a painkiller or are you selling a vitamin as a startup? Extremely important. Team, you just heard Bill Campbell talk about it. It's important to know when to hire somebody into a team. It's probably more important to know when to get rid of somebody from a team. And that's managing for team dynamics. It's an extremely difficult thing to do, no matter how many people you've gotten rid of. It's not something you can do, and if you have a heart, go home and sleep that night very well, or sleep the night before very well, knowing that you're going to do this. But it's extremely important for your team dynamics to be able to understand that. And also managing the team where they're all pulling in the same direction. After the constructive conflict. Financing. Okay? It's way out of your control. You saw what happened in the time frame that especially the last few years, how the cycles have gone up and down. And it's the best time to go raise money is when you don't need it. Okay, I'm going to emphasize this one more time. The best time to raise money is when you don't need it. It just depends on your business and how much of a bank balance you need. And that changes. Way back when we started our company, for example, a single-digit million was fine. Today, our bank balance at any point in time needs to be 9 figures. That's what we are operating at. That's what we maintain. And guess what? People say, can you do that? The reality is people want to come and give you more money if you have that kind of a balance because you've built in a risk protection for them. So money coming in is looking to see what is the risk of my money coming in. The fact that you built that protection in allows you to raise more money and not less. John Mello does a great job of that. So you put all those things together, You have some very interesting examples, but risks are not easy to find, but you can find them. It's a way of tuning yourself as the CEO, as a chief risk mitigation officer, to be able to see where that needle is. Let me give you a couple examples that I didn't talk about from that page. If you take the supply chain, you're often very satisfied you have 2 suppliers for your critical gizmo, because of which now you think you're not single-sourced. You need to dive one level deeper. If both those people are coming from a single source down below, an interruption to this supply chain impacts them both equally. So you're actually single-stringed and not dual-stringed out there. So from a supply chain perspective, for example, that's one way of looking at it, and asking how do you mitigate that risk. Once you start asking those questions, you will find the solution. The key is identifying and asking those questions. Some risks are beyond your control. Okay? We had a part that was coming from Austria that's extremely important from us, week to week. Who could have figured out a volcano is going to come and interrupt air travel for weeks? You do have a problem, and you need to know how to manage that. Sometimes you're able to, and sometimes you're not able to. There are things beyond your control. Well, there are some things that are a lot closer to this organization out here. Most of you are in clean tech. We depend very heavily on policy. I just want to point to you the growth of wind power out here, and look at these 2 years, how they dropped. You know why? The federal policy on investment tax credit, production tax credit. There was uncertainty, and it didn't happen. There's only one thing you can be darn sure about federal policies and state policies. They will not happen in a timely fashion. Okay? If you know how to manage that, if you learn from other industries that have known how to cope with that, you can do really well. While this is outside your control, let me give you an example. Without giving the names of the companies, in 2007, starting in 2005, there's a very clear indication that by 2007, very severe truck emission standards were going to be enforced by the EPA. Starting in 2005, the truckers knew it. Diesel emissions, what that's going to do to trucks. A case of 2 companies, both US. One knew the impact of that was going to be, in 2006, people were going to buy a lot more trucks than had been in the past just to beat the clock. Right? Impending legislation nobody likes. If that happened in 2007, the volume and the demand is going to be very low. One company saw that and planned for that risk. The other company did not. One exists today, the other one doesn't exist. Okay? Not only did they supply the 2006 volume, but they did that expansion in a variable way as opposed to a fixed way, where in 2007, when it had to go down, they did not have to figure out what to do with all those assets. It was just planning for that risk. Some risks are of our own making. Okay? Can you look at a classic example? 2001, 2002, Capstone. This was the darling of Wall Street, right? Microturbines. What did they do wrong? Nothing really. They had a good technology. It was brand new. What happens to any new technology? It's going to fail in the 50 ways that you never thought of when you put it out in the field. They sold these units all over the world, not just on land, in remote places. Remote places need power a lot more than places that have wires. You can command a slightly higher average selling price. But imagine when you have 2,000 or 3,000 of these spread across the globe in difficult-to-service places. Every unit that fails, what it takes to service it. That was the demise of the company in that early stage. Right? That was a risk created of your own making, not understanding what is it that you'll have to look forward to. So with any of these, how do we manage risk? I'm going to keep this short and take some questions from you. I'm going to focus on technology and technology risks. I've talked about the other risks. For all those risks, you can apply the same thing. First is to identify the risks before you encounter them. It's very easy. You think it's very difficult. Get your subject matter experts into a room and ask them, what are the 5 things that can go boom that you're afraid of? Okay? They will lay that out. For every possible thing, you can just lay that out, identify them. Then you need to quantify the level of risk. And again, you don't have to be exactly right on the number. You need the relative guidance. That's what you're looking for. But you need to quantify it and focus on the milestones that are going to address and reduce that risk. That's actually now going to tell you if you're in the process of mitigate the biggest risks very early in the company with the least amount of money spent into the company. This is the way of value creation within the company. If you want to create value, it's very simple. Eliminate the largest risks with the least amount of money. And prioritize those milestones based on that and communicate to everybody why. Oftentimes, we as CEOs are very good about the what. We don't explain the why. So people understand why they're doing what they do. So if you put that together, how many of you know what FMEA is? Show of hands. Very few. Failure modes and effects analysis, right? So that whole thing that I walked you through, there is a very good discipline of failure modes, identifying the failure modes, what effect it will have if those failure modes occur, and an analysis of that. That is what is going to tell you how to contain it, how to mitigate it, how to eliminate it. And so if you then assume that you have 3 components for a very simplistic study that you're trying to develop. These 3 components put together, developed, is what's going to build your product, what's going to make your company happen. For each of those things, again, through brainstorming sessions with your experts, with external experts, identify the different risks. The next thing that you do is to prioritize. Like in any other company, a startup is no exception. Okay, if your house is on fire and your baby needs its diaper changed and you got dishes, you know exactly what your priority is out there, right? It's no different in a large company. There are things that need attention if everything were good, but there are fires that you have to put out. So try to prioritize where they are and figure out what is in your control and what will impact your business the most. Once you put that together, this is what we call a weighting factor. What I just walked through with a graphic is what we call a weighting factor. For each component, you look at the level of risk in terms of weighting factor of if that did not happen, if that particular task did not happen, will it derail the business? Will it derail the quarter? Will it derail the year? If the answer is yes, it's got a very high rating. If it's a very important thing you want to do, but you have 5 other workarounds with which you can solve the problem, it's not as high because it's nice to have, but you have a workaround. If it is you have several alternatives to the design, one is already proven, it needs to be very small because, again, it makes it nice, but this is not what you need to focus on. This is not the fire. Okay? So you have a weighting factor now for each of those components. That's what we call the criticality factor. Next, what you do is estimate the initial risk. Put an initial risk level. This is very hard to do with a team that's never done this before. But once they learn this, it becomes really easy. Very simply, early on when I started, they would say, how do we figure this out? I'd simply say, if nobody on the planet has ever done this for any application, the risk has to be very high, guys. Right? If there's a proof point, but it's not in your environment, slightly lower. If there's a proof point, and one of our team members has already done it, and we know somebody who's done it, whose advice and counsel we can seek, it's slightly less lower. If somebody has done it in our environment, and we know somebody, the risk goes lower. So it's very easy for you to figure out where it needs to fall quantitatively within the plus minus 5. You can put those numbers. You put that level. And then you put a plan together based on all that stuff that you had, right? So then what you do is, independently, your team would have come with a project plan where they say, here are our tasks, here are our milestones, here's the original date by which we need the completion. Have this done independently, because your team will have very strong views on this. After they've given this to you independently, do that risk assessment separately, almost on different days, so they don't even know that there's a connection between the two. Okay? The next thing you go and ask is getting the perspective. You saw the tree, now you've seen the forest. Let's see if we can put this together. You put it together, you ask your team for each one of those milestones that you talked about, if the outcome of that experiment, the outcome of that result that you're running, were to be successful, what risks would you have eliminated, by how much, and what would that risk have come down by? And this becomes extremely revealing as a business plan. If there are all these milestones in the early days that almost don't reduce the risk at all of the key things that you're looking for, and they're all happening out here, and they're all happening at this corner, and that's when you need to be going and raising money. Guess what? Either you're not going to get money or your valuation is not going to be that great. You're putting your company in jeopardy. Your job is to simply look at this and ask, if these are the biggest risks, why is it that you can't solve them early in the days? Well, there may be certain things you simply cannot do, because in the first 8 months you're building a fab. Until that fab is built and something comes out, it's impossible to test it out. But there are a lot of things you can do ahead of time. And that's how you move things around. Now you suddenly work with the team, giving them the why of moving the milestones back and forth to optimize that early risk reduction. So when you put that together, what you end up with for your component teams, assume that you have 3 teams working on those 3 different components. They each have a component risk reduction plan with time. And then the overall product, your company, you have a risk reduction plan with time. Okay? And then you have original plan that you never change. And every board meeting, when you sit in front of your board, you do this. In fact, the way this started, I think Vinod and John liked it, and then T.J. Rogers, actually, we were only 4 months into the company. He brought all his SVPs to Bloom, which at that time was about 12 employees, to learn this technique because he wanted to use that in Cyprus. And the idea was this. I don't think I ever presented a waterfall chart of our burn rate during the first year of the company, because I can be spending money exactly according to plan, or even lower than plan, and not eliminating any of the risks. What does that matter? If I'm able to remove this risk a lot sooner and spending twice the money, guess what? I'm not going to have the board members pushing back. The reality is, what's your burn rate against that? This is the real metric. Okay? So this is how we ran the company and for the technology development. But this has become the culture within the company, where anything and everything that we do, from team building to financing to public relations, we have an FMEA. We look at what can go wrong. Okay? Samir was joking about 60 minutes. That's not an easy decision. You know, if Mike Wallace is knocking on your door, you're probably not having a good day, right? Most often. So you need to know how to manage that. What are the downside risks? How can you come out of it being sure that you're not going to have the downside risks? There's a lot of managing that has to happen behind the scenes. And there's an FMEA associated with that. And if you constantly think of yourself as the risk mitigation officer, I think you're doing your job as a CEO. If you're a firefighter, you know fires, you know how to deal with fires, you know how to reduce damage, and you're not afraid of fighting them. Startups inherently are about risk-taking. If you're not an expert at spotting risk, managing risk, mitigating risk, and eliminating risk, you're probably not the right person at the helm. Better that we be the right people, get that mindset in there. With that, I will simply take any questions from anybody rather than go on with more slides. Go ahead.
So how will this work? In other words, are there things that you make your full list of everything that can go wrong, you got like people together with their top five and so forth. Those are things that really did go wrong, or are there things that are surprises to you?
The risks that come to bite you are the ones you don't know. Okay? Absolutely. There is no question about it. Believe me, if you could have written down everything on a sheet of paper, you will be the exception and not the rule. But similar to the fact that you're going to get lost doesn't mean that you don't need to carry a map. Okay? That's not what we do. You will get lost along the way, and you'll know how to navigate. But you're better off having this plan, and it is not a solid plan. It's a plan on which, based on whatever changes in the business, it's a living document. You need to be able to adjust it, modify it. Overall, I would say you're better off at solving problems and handling problems if you had a plan like this. That's number one. The second point is cultural. When you tune your team and your entire team is tuned to, risk is not something to be afraid of. A startup is a roller coaster. When they're down, risks are high. But having a methodology, having a plan, technologist engineers love nothing better than there's a pathway, there's a thing. Then they don't care. They just go forward and get it done. The fact that you have it helps you even more. So I would say from a cultural perspective, it helps even more, even if you have 15 risks that you didn't identify that show up. And they do. Other questions? I think it's to the contrary, though. I think it's to the contrary. So here is what happens. You put this up, but if you read our value statement that every employee knows, we say we are a company of risk takers. We will take bold risks, and we will celebrate failure. Okay? There is something called a successful failure that you actually celebrate. We don't tolerate failure of execution. We celebrate failure of results, which you can't control. What you also find when you create the culture, in the morning meetings in the teams get together, and people, rather than hold behind and try to hide what they're failing in those meetings, they're the first ones to put their hand up and say, I'm having this problem. I've tried everything. It's not working. I need help. The teams brainstorm. The reason they like that is ultimately they are rewarded for solving their problem. They find out very quickly when they identify risks and saying, I have these problems, they're not beaten up. The messenger is not shot. Okay? They're given the help that they need so they can succeed. So if you create that environment, then risk is not a four-letter word. Okay? It is okay. And when you do that, and when you watch these team dynamics of somebody identifying a risk and the creative juices flowing from everybody else to help them solve the problem, this occurring on a daily basis, it's extremely invigorating. So you actually get the best of both, but you absolutely need to make sure that the culture is such that the guys bringing up the risks that they're seeing are treated the way they should be treated. That's extremely important from a leadership perspective. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, KR.